With every passing year, I get more and more interested in the traditions of my country, the Czech Republic, and specifically the different dishes and meals that people used to make back in the day. And slowly, me and my mom are trying to reintroduce some of those meals into our own daily lives as well. Together with my parents and my partner and little Sarah, we went to our country house this weekend. And for the first time, we tried, or I should say I tried, making something that was, or used to be very, very typical here in the Czech Republic to be made for, or around the time of, well, essentially Halloween, right? The beginning of October for us. And that's these little, I guess we can call them buns. In Czech, we call them Dušičky, which is the same name as the holiday itself, how it's called in the Czech Republic. Now, don't imagine the same thing with people walking around in masks in the evening and trick-or-treating and things like that. That's not really done. What the celebration is more about here is remembering the dead and going to the cemeteries, putting candles and flowers on graves, things like that. So anyways, this sweet dish, or it's not a dish, I don't know how to describe it really. I mean, you will see soon enough the end result, but basically it's a yeasty dough, so nothing super new for us. It's just that maybe the shapes of the buns were a little bit new, and just in general, like making something like this at this time of year was not something that we would do in my family before this. If you want to try and recreate these, I have put all of the ingredients in the description of the video down below, so you can follow that. But basically what I'm doing is I've mixed the flours that I'm using, and I've added the fresh yeast into it with a little bit of my own sourdough starter, which is completely unnecessary. Like that's an extra thing that I do, as I tend to think that the starter adds a little bit more of the bacteria variety to it, so that's why I like to add it. And since, I mean, it is the same thing as yeast other than that, so I just added it as well. And then I've let it sit with a little bit of sugar and milk just to get the yeast going a little bit. And you can see that after a while there is these little bubbles on top of it. So that's kind of how you know that the yeast has started doing something, it has started working, and you can continue with the recipe. I then add in the salt, the milk, and also the rest of the sugar, the butter, the eggs, and then just mix it up. Now, I have, I think, mentioned this before in my videos. I don't have a stand mixer. I don't have it at home. I don't have it here in the country house. So I'm doing these yeasty doughs by hand. And in all the recipes, they will always tell you that this is a lot of work, because the end result you're supposed to get is a very smooth, kind of shiny, glossy dough. And I think that really does take quite a while, like a good 20 minutes of just mixing the dough by hand, and I am just not trained for that. So I did about 5 minutes. The dough was still pretty shaggy at the end, but here's the thing that I discovered, like where this matters is the looks. And you will see later that the buns are sort of uneven and like cracked in a few places. But in terms of like the taste and the dough rising and things like that, I really don't think that there is any difference between how I make the dough and when it is actually very, smooth and glossy from the stand mixer. So I am not bothered so much by the fact that I don't have it and that the dough is not worked perfectly. I just get it to a reasonable state when it stops kind of sticking to the bowl, like it starts peeling off a little bit more, and then I just let it covered for whatever time necessary until it kind of doubles, or maybe even more than that. Like, it's really fine. I don't think that there is any upper limit as to how long you can let it sit. Well, maybe don't do it for 2 days, but a couple hours is definitely absolutely fine. And once the dough has risen, I have put it out and started taking these little balls out of it. I just measured the first one since the cookbook I was using said it should be about 50 grams each of the little bowls, and it was precisely 50 grams. So I was pretty proud of myself for taking the exact measurement, and then I just didn't measure the rest. I just eyeballed whatever seemed like the appropriate size or the same size as the first one. And I just rolled them into nice little balls with my hands, and then again just covered them up for a little bit longer until I kind of cleaned my prep area, and I've prepared my baking tray with the baking paper on it. And then it was time to start making the shapes. Now, here is where you will see what I meant before, that it's kind of difficult to describe. Like, the original, or let's say traditional shapes of these should be those of bones and essentially ghosts, or like Dušičky. So it's, truth be told, I didn't do too much research into this. I just Googled a few pictures to see what could pass as a good bun shape for this. And I've tried to do the bones. At first I had no idea how to make that work, and I think all of them came out pretty funny. Like, I don't think anyone would be able to recognize that that was supposed to be a bone shape. But then I had a lot of fun with especially these like spirals, or like these kind of like tiny wreaths or something. I also made some crosses, and these little like attached balls. It was a lot of fun, this shaping process. And this dough is really easy to shape, I would say, so it was also pretty easy to do whatever I kind of could think of. Once I had all of the shapes, I then brushed them with an egg wash. And then they went into the oven at 180 degrees. And here the cookbook said like 12 to 15 minutes. I did each of the trays for a different amount of time, because one of them I've put at the very top of the oven, the other one went more to the bottom, so the upper one was of course done first. And I really was in the kitchen there the whole time, kind of checking to make sure that they're not goldening too fast, and that they just have a really nice color and are ready to go. And it smelled so delicious in the kitchen. I love this kind of dough. I mean, you've seen me just a short while ago to use this for an apple pie, and I was saying that that's one of my favorites. And I mean, this is a very similar kind of a dough, so no surprise that I love this one as well. And here we are with the finished result. What I've also found in some of the cookbooks is that there used to also be, or people would also make a sweet variant, which is what this is, and also a savory one, sometimes putting poppy seeds on top of them, or filling them up with like a plum jam, let's call it, or cream cheese, or making like a plum sauce for them or something like that. We just had them with a little bit of butter, and they were absolutely delicious, and I cannot wait to make them again next year. The next thing me and my mom are making is this goose that you can see in the oven, and I will just chop up some cabbage to go with it. And while I'm doing all the chopping, I can tell you a little bit more about this traditional meal, which we have already done in the last couple of years. This is, I would say, kind of like our variation on the American Thanksgiving. Normally, this goose is typical for the celebration of St. Martin, or on St. Martin's Day, which is the 11th of November. So we had it a little bit earlier since this was filmed on the 3rd of November. But as far as I've read, it was the celebration of the end of the harvest and, you know, the kind of coming of winter. So I believe that's the same as Thanksgiving, and I'm sure many other holidays around the world. So the goose is very typical, as well as the side dishes, which again is the cabbage that we are chopping up into these strips. And then we put it into a big pot where we already had browned an onion. And then it's going to cook there, covered with a lid for, I want to say 30-ish minutes, 20-ish minutes, basically until it softens. So it also depends on the state of the cabbage. And then you just season it a little bit with salt and some vinegar. You can also add sugar if the cabbage itself is not sweet enough, or if you've maybe added too much of the vinegar, then you can fix that taste with a little bit of sugar. And we are also doing some dumplings as a side dish, which again, very typical Czech side dish. You've already seen me use those a couple times before. And this is the finished meal. Now, this video would not be complete if I didn't mention mushrooms, because mushroom picking is a bit of a Czech national sport, I would think. And I would also say that we are quite unique in this. I don't know that mushrooms are picked this much in any other countries in the world. Like here, as soon as you have some good weather conditions for growing mushrooms, you will just see lines and lines of cars parked on the side of every wood that you're passing on the road, and people are just going crazy. Now, I've got these from my neighbors. And of course, you do want to be careful when mushroom picking to make sure that you are picking only the edible ones. These ones that she brought me, they're very clearly the ones that we are all familiar with here. So I had no problem using those, but I did test them in my mushroom recognition app just to be sure. And what I'm doing with these is a stuffing, and we will have a whole chicken to go with it later. So first I'm browning an onion, and then in a big bowl, I am cutting up these bread rolls. Again, if this is something that you don't really have in wherever you live, this is just like white bread. So white, soft, sandwich bread, that sort of a texture and taste. So that could be easily replaced with that. Once I'm done with the bread rolls, I then cut in all of the mushrooms. And I think you can kind of see the proportions of those. To be honest, I would have probably liked to have even more of the bread rolls and a little bit less of the mushrooms. But, it was really nice as it was. I'm then also adding some eggs, some garlic, salt, and 2 spices, cumin and marjoram. If you don't have marjoram, then a perfectly good substitute for that is oregano. So feel free to use that if you, again, want to recreate this. I will also be using some milk, and into that milk, I've put a bouillon cube. Now, I haven't used bouillon cubes in so long, but I just had this last one sitting in my cupboard. So I thought, let's just use it up. And from now on, I can stick to using my chicken broth, which I now have all the time, I feel like. And then I combined all of those together, or all the milk together with the rest of the ingredients. And last but not least, there was about 100 grams of melted butter that went on top of this stuffing. It went to the oven at 180 degrees for, I want to say 30-ish minutes, basically until you're happy with how golden the top is. This was so delicious, even though I said I would prefer to have the ratio a little bit more in favor of the bread. This was just so nice and crispy, and it was just perfect to go with the chicken, and we also had a little bit of salad on the side. And that was everything for me today, and I'll see you next time.